Good morning and welcome to the webinar. I'm Sheila Corrigan, Sales Director at Totaljobs. We're sharing our latest research and what we have called the reversal of the brain drain, a look at the UK migration trends. Today, I'll be joined by Geraint Johnes, Professor of Economics at Lancaster University. Geraint, before we begin, can you tell us a moment about yourself?
Yes, hi Sheila, hello everyone. I'm Geraint Johnes, Professor of Economics at Lancaster University Management School. I have a specialism in labour economics, so I'm interested in things like, well, what incentivizes people to go and work in different places. So this issue about migration, the brain drain, is core to my research interests established over several decades by now. And I've been working with Totaljobs on a couple of projects. One last year we called the Northern Pound, and this one that we're going to be hearing about today, specifically about migration to and from the southeast and London in particular. So I'll say a little bit more about that later.
Great, thank you. Before we begin, just to inform you, we're recording this webinar, so we'll be sharing the slides and recording afterwards. There's no need to take notes. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box and we will do our best to come to these at the end. Back in February this year, Totaljobs worked with Geraint to analyse historical ONS migration data and gather insights from workers. That's 2,000 workers. More recently, we looked at these trends again alongside insight from workers to understand how Covid-19 has impacted the UK mobility and what this means for businesses in the UK. Let's begin. First, a quick overview of the market we currently find ourselves in and some recent changes we've seen. Last month, the Chancellor of the Exchequer's summer statement included a big focus on jobs, including the Kickstart scheme and jobs retention bonus. Employers have been given more discretion from the government when it comes to staff returning to the workplace, but many continue to operate a working from home policy for relevant roles. Some have decided to keep this in place until 2021. Data from Google suggests visits to workplaces are down by 45% versus January. On the 6th of August, Bank of England announced the UK economic slump because of Covid-19 will be less severe than recently expected, but full recovery will take longer. It now expects the economy to shrink by 9.5% in 2020, lower than the initial 14%. Spend on clothing and household furnishings is now back to pre-Covid levels, while consumers have carried on spending more on food and energy than before the lockdown. Leisure spending and business investments remain subdued, which is where government initiatives to help sectors back on their feet are so important. Current unemployment rate sits at 3.9%. Today's ONS announcement highlighting that employment dropped again between April and June. The Bank of England expects unemployment to rise to 7.5% by the end of this year, as government-funded support schemes come to an end. On Totaljobs, over 19.6 million candidate searches were made in July, the highest volume of searches for those looking for roles in social care, administration, logistics. Unsurprisingly, we've also seen some searches for hospitality at 49%, chefs at 31%, catering at 36%, following the reopening of the sector. The retail sector has seen 27% rise in applications, education 33%, and administration at 28% rise, all showing strong activity since the shops have opened and the approach to the start of the next school year. 122,000 jobs were advertised on Totaljobs in July. While this is a 43% drop from pre-Covid February, this is notably up 60% on April, 64% on May, and 29% on June, as we continue this upward trend. London is known for its movers and shakers, but our research with Geraint suggested many young workers are becoming disillusioned with the city. Whether their reasons are personal, financial, professional, or otherwise, we find that many of young workers were already planning their departure from the capital since February this year. With this, over half the city's population are willing to relocate in general. This was a sign the brain drain was kicking into reverse as the initial pool of London for many graduates across the UK turns to a push as they gain experience and move through their careers. With over half the city's population willing to relocate, apologies, I'm going to pass over to Geraint now to open about this in more depth.
Thanks, Sheila. So I think what we're seeing here is the technology that is represented by the platform that we're having this webinar on at the moment is leading to change in the labour market, and more people are able to work flexibly, work from home. We've seen that has been accelerated during the COVID epidemic, and a lot of people are realising that they don't need to be in the place of work all the time in order to conduct their work activities. So we'll see something more about the implications of that a little later. The big banner that we've got on the current slide, one in three graduates, new graduates, move to London after finishing university. And this has often been referred to as the brain drain. They study across the country, and then a lot of the best graduates gravitate towards London, so that a third of UK graduates are setting the sights on the capital, maybe, or maybe they just realise that the best jobs for graduates, new graduates, are in London, and so they move to London immediately after university. Now, Totaljobs sister company, Milk Round, did some research earlier this year, and that revealed that 77% of recent graduates feel that there are more job opportunities in London particularly, and in the big cities generally. In London, certainly if they can afford to move there immediately after graduation, then that's something a lot of graduates do, but it does cost around £3,000, almost £3,000 for new graduates to move to London in many cases. And that is an impediment to many who are obviously taking on a whole load of graduate debt at that time as well. London clearly benefits from the brain drain. Employers there get a ready source of young employees that are well qualified and can go on to the career ladder. Now, if we look at what's driving people to move to London, a lot of them go there for better job opportunities, maybe for a specific job offer. A key thing is the life in London, and this isn't really the theatres or the museums, because you can travel to see those, but it's just the energy of having a young, vibrant workforce. A lot of people go there because their friends are going there as well, so it's a big centre for people. It's also a higher salary, although of course that comes with higher costs, which is something I investigated with Totaljobs last year in the Northern Pound research that we did. It's really the perception that there's better job opportunities, a specific job offer, moving to the bright lights. These are the things that attract people to London then. For London businesses, that's an advantage, but a lot of the UK top talent comes straight to the businesses, so long as they can afford to be mobile at least. But it looks as though young Londoners are increasingly getting disillusioned with certain aspects of living in London. It's still a vibrant place, still an exciting place to work, still a lot of activity going on there. But there are, of course, costs to living in London, and these are really costs that are to do with space and their ability to buy their own space or rent their own space. If you buy in London, then it costs a lot. If you rent in London, it costs a lot, and you get less space than you would outside of the capital. So if we look at the attitudes that young people living in London have, then 26% of workers in their 20s have been leaving London since 2017. 1 in 4, we found in Totaljobs research, 1 in 4 young workers are planning to move out of the capital, and that's research that we undertook earlier this year in February, before COVID. And there's been a large increase over the last 5 years or so in the numbers of 30-somethings that are leaving London. If we look at the net figures, then London is losing 88 workers a day. That may not sound a lot, but over the course of a year, that is equivalent to losing a town the size of, say, Worksop or Fleet or Grantham. That many people are leaving London. That's across all age groups. That's how many more people are leaving than are coming in. So that's net migration out of London. And that has accelerated over recent years. If we look at the age breakdown here, there's been a 26% increase in the number of 20-somethings leaving London in the last few years. For those in their 30s, there's been a 49% increase in outbound migration over the last 5 years. So it's a key demographic here with the age group that's leaving London more than any other age group at the moment. If we look at gross figures, then 1 million young workers are set to leave London before they reach the age of 33. And that is gross migration, but it means that people are tending to leave London at a younger age than they did previously. So 2 in 3 people who left London in 2018, that's the most recent ONS data that we've got access to, 2 out of 3 that left London moved far enough away that they're no longer in easy commutable distance. So a lot of people are moving to the north, for example, centres like Manchester, Leeds, Bristol. Bristol's not in the north, but they're moving some distance away from London so that it's out of easy commuting distance. And this may be because of the increased digitization of the workplace, people being able to use the kind of tools that we're using today in webinars and Zoom and so on. But it may also be that people are looking for jobs in these other areas. And there is the perception increasingly that there are better opportunities outside of London for young people and people reaching the age at which they'd enter middle management to go for. So if we look at the factors that are driving the millennials out of London, it really is a matter of trying to reduce living costs, trying to get more space, wanting to start a family, thinking it's unrealistic that they'll ever get to own a property in London. These are things that have always been there. What has changed is the new way in which we work, and that may well have been accelerated by the experience of the last few months. There's emotional factors at play as well. So there's around 1 in 4 leaving to start a family, 14% looking for better schools, 12% driven by wanting to spend more time with their children. One of the downsides of London is the commuting time, and that's dead time essentially. So it's this time where you're not working, you're not spending the time with your family either. And it may be things like that that are encouraging people as they set up families also to look for a move outside of the capital. Money goes quite a bit further in the north. So the Northern Pound research that we did with Totaljobs and myself last year suggested there was something like a 17% gap, so almost 20% further in the north. It goes down to cheaper coffee. Not so convinced about those prices actually there, but commuting costs certainly into London, because people are commuting longer distances, the commuting costs are considerably higher than elsewhere, and it takes longer, and time has a value as well. If you look at rents much higher in London for much smaller space, and property prices much higher in London, again, for much smaller space. So overall, around a 17% gap in the value of a pound between London and the north. The research that we did on this focused on several cities in the north. So we had Liverpool, Leeds, York, Newcastle, Sheffield, all in the north compared with London. Looking at the preferences of people to be where they are, last year when we did this research, only 31% of northerners considered moving elsewhere, compared with 53% of people living in London. So there's quite a gap there. There's certainly more opportunity for mobility now, career opportunities, higher salaries, drive graduates to the capital, but half of 25 to 34-year-olds, based on Totaljobs research here, believe that in the last 5 years, job prospects have improved in other areas of the UK. More than half of London's young workforce have already looked at jobs elsewhere in the UK, and they're making a very informed decision about their next steps. And the millennials are also considering how this would work practically for them. 30% are expecting to find a job nearer to their new home, so they're not necessarily looking to commute back into London once they move out. We did a lot of this research back in February. Then something happened, COVID hit, and we expect that this will have radical implications for the way in which the labour market works. So more recently, in June, Totaljobs have repeated the survey that we undertook in February about Londoners' willingness to move out of the capital. And it's a very interesting thing to do, to compare the results of the February survey with those of the June survey, because there are some very stark differences. And I'll hand back now to Sheila, who will tell us something about those.
Thank you, Geraint. So before the pandemic, the ONS estimates over 20 million people had zero experience of working from home. Since March, millions have relocated to their home offices. The proportion of people travelling to work now sits at 51% according to the latest ONS figures, while proportion working from home exclusively sits at 25% according to the 6th of August figures. Meanwhile, demand for staff in delivery and logistical roles, supermarkets, health and social care have soared. Hospitality, travel and retail fell significantly, with the majority of staff placed on furlough at the start of lockdown. It's no surprise then that all of this change has got people thinking. Totaljobs research from April this year at the peak of the pandemic revealed 2 in 3 people were re-evaluating their career as a result of COVID. And 1 in 5 workers think their role simply wasn't for them. And it's not just careers on people's minds. Covid-19 has led many to consider where they wish to live. City living doesn't look the same anymore. With the pandemic coupled with historical factors already driving people out of London, the pandemic could be the final push for people to up sticks. Our research in June saw that it wasn't just London anymore, it's cities across the whole of the UK where people are starting to think hard about where they want to be. 26% of Londoners, equivalent to 1.6 million people, have been working outside of the capital during lockdown, and they want to continue to do so. The same goes for other city workers across the UK, with 27% of them not wanting to return to their city-based offices while they've experienced working from home. All of these factors, taken together, has resulted in 27% of Londoners not now wanting to move out of city earlier than they had originally planned because of COVID-19. But where are they looking to go? Before the pandemic, ONS data showed a steep rise in number of Londoners moving to non-commutable destinations over the last 5 years. The top destinations for relocation for Londoners is Birmingham, Bristol and Manchester. While many millennials back then said they preferred a location based which was closer to their family and friends by returning to their hometowns. More than a quarter, that's 29% of those looking to move, said their job opportunities would be the deciding factor on where they end up. City living and its limitations have been brought to a sharp focus during the pandemic. It's no surprise then with this, 32% of Brits now are more interested in living in a rural area. And 34% now they want to live somewhere with more outside space. It's very different living in a flat during lockdown with no garden versus a house with outside green space, all for a lower price. For many movers, it seems flexible working holds the key. So all of this, what's the opportunity for businesses? A third of people say that long-term flexible working would encourage them to move. rising to 37% of 18 to 24-year-olds nationally. For Londoners, this is even more of a game changer. 43% state that if their London-based employer offered them flexible working or remote working, they'd be encouraged to move out of the capital. The government has announced a cut in stamp duty and subsidised jobs for young people across the UK to aid economic recovery following the pandemic. If employers also take steps to adapt, it would enable people across the UK to allow their personal and family life be prioritised once again, and rather than this being dictated by their working life. 38% of Londoners now being unable to move in the past due to job commitments. There's a real opportunity here to give your staff a more fulfilling work life by giving them the flexibility they need. For employers who have found home working to be successful during the pandemic, you're in a really strong position here to retain your talent even if they move away. Think of the 29% back in February who are looking for other job opportunities to help them decide on where they wish to settle. Now, if you're an employer in a position to offer remote working, you don't have to lose your top talent to employers elsewhere. Of course, not all jobs can be done remotely. Key workers in health, social care, logistics, food and retail, plus the millions of people who were put on furlough during lockdown, might well be among those who wish to relocate. So for people holding on-site roles who are tempted to relocate, can employers retain them and still give them what they need for to reach their own personal and family milestones, like home ownership? 42% of millennials say salary benchmarking could encourage them to stay in London, while 28% would need support with travel costs. So they could move out of the capital, but commute in and remain working for their employer. Greater childcare would mean 22% of under 35s would be less driven to move further afield. And in regards to entry-level roles, thinking about additional support graduates or young people might need to get their foot on the career ladder is really important to broaden your talent in the talent pool and be a more inclusive employer. The relocation allowance is a tax break, which means relocation with costs of up to £8,000 is exempt from national insurance and income tax. This could help retain and support new starters who would need to relocate to work for you, or long-term staff looking to live elsewhere. To sum up, the migration trends we've seen in recent years aren't drastically changing and being altered by the pandemic, but they are accelerating. With remote working becoming normalised for certain roles, it could mean that employers are no longer restricted to looking in local talent pools. People can be hired from anywhere if their role can be performed remotely some or all of the time. Flexibility also means that people can build experience and reach their own personal milestones, whether that's starting a family, wanting to upsize their flat, or progress. On a wider scale, if there's more mobility across the UK, this could help rebalance the opportunities across the country if employers are willing to embrace this new way of life and support those staff who are looking at relocating, whether their role is on site or not. So far, I hope you're finding this session insightful. I'm sure it will make us think differently towards the options available to retain our top talent. And it certainly opens up our talent pools for us to hire for certain roles. It's now time to move to our panel. I want to say a big thank you to our panelists for joining us today. Alongside Geraint, we have Robert Peasnell, Deputy Manager Director at PeopleScout UK, and Emily Knowles and Gina Godsiff, Candidate Marketeers at the CoOp. They each bring their own expertise. We're just waiting now for Robert to come in. And while we wait for Robert, oh, Robert, here he is. Before we begin, have some intros from you each. Robert, I don't know if you wish to go first. Give us a bit of an information yourself, please.
Yeah, lovely. Morning, everybody. My name, as Sheila just said, is Robert Peasnell. I'm Deputy Managing Director of PeopleScout in the UK. We run two businesses. One is an RPO where we support employers around resourcing, and the other is kind of a recruitment marketing brand, TMP Worldwide. We're lucky enough across both of those to work with about 100 employers, supporting a range of kind of resourcing challenges. So hopefully can bring some of that knowledge to bear in the discussion now.
Great. Gina, would you like to go next?
Yeah, that's no problem. So hi everyone, I'm Gina. I'm a candidate marketer at CoOp. So what we do at CoOp is quite a unique title, but we look after the talent attraction and employer branding side of recruitment. I specifically look after attraction campaigns across the non-volume business areas at CoOp. So that'll cover anything in our support centres like Manchester head office and any of the more senior positions out in the field.
Great, thank you, Gina. And Emily?
Hi, so I'm Emily. I do exactly the same role as Gina, but I uniquely look after the volume recruitment and the attraction of our member pioneers into the CoOp, which is quite a unique role based in communities across the breadth of the UK. So yeah, hi.
Great. Right, we've had some fantastic questions put forward today, so I'm quite excited about this. But I'm going to start with you, Geraint. As you know, we've recently been looking into the gig economy across the UK regions. Can you tell us a bit more about this and how this fits into what we've shared today?
Yes, this is something that has received quite a lot of attention over recent years, is the rise of the gig economy with the development of platforms online that people can use as intermediaries between the buyers and sellers of labour. But we've known relatively little about the incidence of it, so there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. I wanted to find out something a little bit more concrete, and in particular look at the incidence of gig economy work across the country and how it varies across regions. So I went into the data files of the Labour Force Survey, looked at the kinds of jobs that tend to be done by gig workers, and looked at the incidence of self-employment amongst those people working in those jobs in the various regions to get a kind of maximum figure for gig economy activity region by region in the UK over a period of about 15 years. And what I found is that at most across the country, there's around 6% of all employment could be gig economy employment. So it receives a lot of hype, but it's probably more hype than the figures warrant, in the sense that it's still a minority activity in terms of the amount of work done. But there has certainly been an increase, and that increase has been greatest in London and the South East. And probably the reason for that is that gig economy work comes in a number of flavours. So you get driving jobs like Uber, delivery jobs, Deliveroo and Just Eat and so on. But you also get white collar gig economy work, things like freelancing for journalists or for broadcasters, freelance IT work, white collar work that might be mediated through platforms like Amazon's MTurk, for example. And there's a lot more of that kind of activity going on in the capital than elsewhere. So if you look at how gig economy activity has increased, it's increased more in London than other parts of the country, but that is probably because there is more white collar gig employment going on in the capital than in other regions.
Okay, thank you. And Emily, let's move to you to start with. How do you manage at the CoOp a remote workforce and maintain a sense of community?
So I think Gina's going to tell us a little bit about our CoOp digital team, if that's all right, and then I'll add a little bit on that.
No, it's just something that I've worked quite closely with. I mean, prior to the pandemic, we've always had some level of kind of flexible remote working at CoOp, but our digital team have done just extremely well. They've been a really great example of how to really manage that remotely. We've explored quite a lot of new ways to collaborate, so things like bringing in new tools and platforms just to work better as a team digitally. But one of the things they did at the start of lockdown was publish an It's Okay To blog, which basically had things like it's okay to juggle home working with homeschooling, it's okay to feel overwhelmed, along with some fun ones like it's okay to be business up top and comfort down below. But ultimately, the main priority has really been about respecting people's time, making meetings shorter, giving people time away from the screen to reset. So definitely growing that sense of community and really bringing people together, even if we might be physically much further away.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of add to that, I think possibly, working together as teams is actually probably better than it's ever been before. Our sense of community is massively heightened, and that's not, just in work. We know everyone's talking to their neighbours possibly for the first time, and we're all putting that effort in, and actually that feels like it's working. We as a candidate marketing team at the CoOp went from being predominantly office-based in Manchester city centre, where actually we used to get the positives of idea generation over a coffee or studying a breakout area, and actually that was pretty much stripped away. So we've had to really create that virtually, and we've done that in a similar way to CoOp Digital. And I think the biggest thing though is we've got a massive strength behind us. The CoOp is community at its heart, and so as we hear about our stores and our funeral homes and the amazing work that they're doing as pillars of the community, actually it gives us the encouragement as teams to overcome some of these challenges and say, what, this is what it is. We've got to kind of create that sense of community and team spirit amongst us, and we'll do our best to do that. But absolutely, I can say, personally, having gone from office to home overnight in its full capacity, we're doing that. So it's interesting times, but it's positive stuff.
Yes, thank you. It certainly is interesting times. And Robert, at PeopleScout, how do you manage the remote workforce and to maintain that sense of community?
I think it's been a really, and echoing a lot of what Gina and Emily have just said, it's been a really interesting kind of transition. I'm surprised that in terms of our creative teams, they always used to kind of collaborate in clusters. You'd have, copywriters, art directors, filmmakers working in the same room to kind of come up with ideas. And I think we've been, really impressed that we've been able to do that virtually. I think part of that's been around technology. So and you have to be careful, and I like Gina's point around that time to kind of break from kind of back-to-back Zoom or other calls. But I think the big piece for us has been around communications, and also how do you replicate some of those kind of almost more casual, edge of the desk or water cooler type moment. So a kind of clearer, more distinctive kind of comm strategy has been a really big part of that for us, as well as technology, and just, I guess, being more conscious of people's kind of well-being and their broader, how work fits into their broader life.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And Robert, while we're still on you, before COVID-19, did you see more candidate mobility? That might be in terms of candidates relocating to start working with you or your clients, or start moving partway through their careers, for an example.
Yeah, and I think it's certain job families where there's been long-standing kind of pressure. So, digital will be a key one. Some of the procurement cyber roles will be there. I think we're seeing a lot more flexibility with clients. So, yes, London's still got a big digital hub, but you've got Spinningfields in Manchester, you've got Brighton, and we're seeing the growth of outer London centres where that's being fostered. And I think generally clients, particularly clients in a kind of consulting type environment, looking at how do we hold on to that talent that typically leaves a certain kind of trajectory in their kind of life, and what can they build in to deliver more flexibility. So I think that has been there before. I think this will absolutely accelerate it, because the sort of naysayers, or those kind of managers who felt the presenteeism was everything, have been clearly proved wrong. And I think there's a new model evolving.
Great, thank you. Emily, would you like to go next on that? So before COVID-19, did you see more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably just worth us mentioning a little bit about kind of our hiring managers and working with managers across our business that have vacancies. You know, prior to COVID, there was really no standardised flexible working policy at the Co-op when I'm referring to kind of our head office support centre to roles, and actually there's not now. You know, we're working through this change in this kind of pace that everyone else is. But hiring managers, you know, recruiting new colleagues into their teams, were they probably before favouring locally based candidates that were fully accessible to the office? Probably so. And working from home at the scale it is now was completely unknown at that time, and naturally made hiring managers nervous. But actually now what we're seeing is a huge shift. You know, they're huge. You know, they're more open. You know, hiring managers now are far more flexible to candidates working from a different location, being fully based in a totally different location, and you know, having different life circumstances that may mean you need that flexible working flexibility. But also there's a new positivity around that, because actually people are doing it themselves. They trust that it works. But it's absolutely an ongoing conversation. And I think you know, there's a piece around kind of our internal mobility as well, which kind of Gina's got some kind of more information on she could share with us.
Great, Gina. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just to add to that. I mean, what we do at Co-op, we've got this commitment to basically developing our colleagues and then supporting them to move into different roles around the business. So whether that's through secondments or permanent moves, and we've got what we call an internal mobility policy. And some big organisations do have stuff like this, but not everybody does. So, for example, if we have got more in terms of what we're seeing at the moment, we've got more internal employees applying for roles into, say, our head office that are slightly further afield than, say, Manchester, where our bigger support centre is based, because they've got that option to sort of primarily work from home and then come up to Manchester maybe 1 or 2 days a week. I think it just really adds to that diversity piece as well. Obviously, we've all got a big focus on at the moment, probably now more than ever, and not just from a characteristics point of view, but from a sort of diversity of thought. It just really brings people in, so say from our front line, like food stores or funeral homes, and really strengthens those different viewpoints and experiences that we've got throughout the team.
Great, thank you. And Emily, if we begin with you on this one, how do you approach conversations about relocation, and what can businesses offer that we might not have touched on already today?
Yeah, so I think here at the Co-op, we're on a journey with that. We'd be totally honest in saying that. I think prior to the pandemic, they were one-off conversations, really, relocation packages. It's not something that we've ever kind of openly offered as a big selling point of coming to work for the Co-op. You know, no kind of big golden handshake or kind of pull or gesture in that way. And actually, they were quite few and far between. So when I was working specifically on roles for our support centre, it was very rarely that we had conversations about kind of relocation. But we did often face into challenges where we were looking and fishing in a very small pool of candidates locally, and some of the niche kind of highly desired skill sets that we were after weren't really housed locally in the Northwest. And actually, you know, there were plenty of candidates, but they were further afield. So I think for us, what we've got to kind of take is this opportunity now to kind of fish in those wider pools and come up with what that might look like for us. But we're definitely on a journey. But whatever we do decide, I think what's going to be massive is making that front and center of whatever kind of campaign content we have out there. You know, your research has showed us that kind of a third of people are saying that long-term flexible working being part of the advert and the sell would encourage them to move. You know, that's massive. So actually, let's get it in our advert, let's get it in our programmatic banners, let's get it in our social assets. And actually, that's what's going to pull those candidates in and mean we're getting the best candidates for a role, hopefully that will stick and stay in role. But yeah, we're on a journey with it, absolutely.
Gina, and for yourself? I can't hear.
Gina, we can't hear you.
I would be that one that forgot to unmute, wouldn't I? No, it's fine. I was trying to avoid cats running in and out of the background, so it's all good. Nothing like a morning crisis, right? So, as Emily said, I'll try and play it smooth. As Emily said, it's really just got to be the beginning of that conversation that we have with candidates. So whether that is sort of in social media campaigns that we're doing, whether that's in the job advert content, ultimately candidates have got so much at risk now because obviously the job situation that we've seen with the market, so many people going on furlough, so many redundancies, and even those that thought they had quite secure jobs turning out that actually they weren't. Business restructures, there's so much happening because of COVID that's affected sort of the day-to-day running of businesses that candidates are just having to really balance up that risk versus reward when they then look for a new role. And I think ultimately that's why it just needs to be there, like I say, really illustrated, highlighted as much as you can at the start of that conversation when they're looking for something new. But I think it's like Emily said, it's an ongoing piece, and I think we will see more of it, not just at CoOp, I think across the industry as we have more of this flexibility and, dare I say, adjust to the new way of working and the new normal. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Gina. And Robert, for yourself?
Yeah, I think some of the most interesting conversations we're having with clients are around the sacrifice potentially that comes through home working and kind of productivity. So lots of data out there, you have all seen it, that says, you know, people broadly seem to be more productive working from home, and there's a real win for the organisation there. But I guess what we're interested in is there something around their personal and professional development that is lacking in both on a kind of, how do you deliver that in a kind of formal sense, but I guess also that sort of informal learning through osmosis, you know, as part of kind of teams and what have you. And I think for employers that there's a real focus on actually being really clear about how they articulate what they'll deliver around personal and professional development, whilst people clearly can't come into kind of classrooms and have to learn and develop in a slightly different way.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to see if there are any questions that have come from the panel, from the audience, sorry.
Hi Sheila, we've got a great question that has come through that would be really good to get your insights on. So have you got any insights, or have you seen any insights into the productivity impact that working from home has had for businesses so far and over the long term?
Who's that going to, Lauren?
Do we want to start with Gina?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I mean, I can probably speak from personal experience in our teams, and I know that because of our teams, I know that I think we've actually been more productive in things like having those shorter meeting times, allowing breaks and things. It's the only caveat to that is potentially the lines are a little bit more blurred between the start and the end of the day, which I think I probably wouldn't be the only one to say. You know, across all businesses, I think a lot of people are maybe working through lunch or juggling things, but it's been quite refreshing, I think, to have that balance. But personally, I know our team have been super productive. I think we've worked stronger, as Emily mentioned previously, stronger as a team, maybe remotely than we have sometimes in the office, working in a big environment where there's quite a lot of distractions. Actually, you're quite limited to distractions at home, albeit you'd think there's probably more. I think it just keeps that focus on your day-to-day and your tasks a little bit more on the activity, but certainly across the teams as well, the feedback has been across the business that there has been really high levels of productivity, and potentially the shift in the future is that we see people not necessarily based on, you know, people will be tasked more based on output rather than say the time that they're in the office or things like that. So I think that's potentially the way that future job roles will probably be shifting as well.
Emily, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think you know, Gina's talked there about kind of our own personal experiences. We've recently done some kind of insight gathering and some webinars ourselves internally to deliver to our resourcing team, and you know, it was really insightful reading reports from organisations across the world that were reporting, you know, their differences of opinion on productivity, and you kind of saw trends that show, you know, those that were forward thinking, you know, modern tech workplaces were were really unfazed by this. It was normal, you know. There's a level of trust that's just intrinsically built within leaders across businesses that are forward thinking, that they do not have kind of any, you know, thoughts or feelings about where the person is based, but absolutely just about the outputs of their work and the quality and the delivery of what they do. But absolutely, there are still, you know, more traditional businesses and with a little bit more of an old school mentality that, you know, there was some reports around, unless you're seen in the office, you know, you're less likely to be promoted, that kind of thing. And, you know, all of that research really made me think, oh gosh, really, that's still there. But it is, you know, it absolutely is. I think, you know, like I said, when I was talking about the hiring managers, piece earlier, people are becoming less nervous and less kind of closed off to this flexibility now, which is great to see.
And Robert, would you like to add some comments?
Yeah, I kind of, I guess, echo everything that everyone said before. I think what we're seeing is almost clients reframing job profiles and kind of how they measure people. So much more this kind of move towards kind of job crafting, a clear set of, you know, broadly what are the outputs that we want from this role, and some clarity around measuring that, but much less focus on a series of tasks or how they get there. Greater, I think, autonomy really for people to shape what they do to deliver the desired outcomes, and that being the kind of critical measurement.
Could I just chip in here, Sheila? That there is, of course, evidence from the Office for National Statistics on productivity, because they measure it all the time. And you look at standard measures of productivity like output per hour worked, and you can look at what's happened to that over the COVID period. Output, of course, we know has gone down a lot, but the number of hours worked has gone down more. So productivity, the headline that you will see is that productivity has increased over the COVID period. But I'd caution against taking a very simplistic interpretation of that, because there is not just one COVID, and COVID affects different people and different businesses in very different ways. So, you know, we've got Gina and Emily here from the CoOp, and the CoOp, you look at the core business, it has carried on through the period. But you may compare that then with a manufacturing firm that has had nobody working over the whole period, and their experiences are going to be very different. So the experience in terms of productivity is going to be different across industries, and that's going to have long-term effects for the development of the structure of the economy.
Great, thank you. Lauren, are there any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, we've had another great question following on around the topic of productivity. So if presenteeism is more likely at home, how do we support staff to maintain a work-life balance?
Robert, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I guess I think Gina said work and home has become blurred. So I think it's about really important in terms of setting some boundaries and kind of expectations. So we're part of an international business, and always, you know, some of our colleagues in the States, you know, they sign off their email with a kind of line that says effectively, I'm sending this at a time that suits me. I don't expect you to respond now. I expect you to respond when it suits you. And I think we're trying to work to a sort of set of core hours that allow people time to look after families or do domestic activity there. And I think certainly we're seeing that meetings are being compressed into that kind of core period, and we're not seeing the kind of the very early or the very late meetings that used to occur before.
Right, thank you. Emily, Gina, how's it at the CoOp for you?
Yeah, I think for us, you know, speaking from personal experience, it has been massively challenging to balance, and I don't think I've found a full balance yet, you know, as much as it's kind of been going on for a long time, and I think it's going to take time, but you know, I think as leaders in teams and as organisations, I think as long as you're helping your employees along with that, I think that's been one of the saving graces to working for the CoOp. We've been very lucky to have some great supportive leaders. We've had some great kind of sound bites from leaders on sharing experiences. We've had blogs to read, you know, wellbeing resources to access, and that's obviously been hugely helpful during this changing time. obviously not everyone's as lucky as that, but I know there are loads of things externally that you can kind of read, and you know, you take any magazine you've been picking up, any e-magazine you've been reading, it's been kind of loads of helpful advice, and I think that's all I can say is I've been leaning heavily on that kind of stuff. We are absolutely still adjusting to this new working method, and the balance isn't always there, but yeah, I think that's it.
Gina, have you got anything to add?
I'd probably just echo that. To be fair, it's you know, everyone's kind of covered it really, and it's like we mentioned before, it is sometimes it's a journey for everyone, you know, across, I was going to say across the UK, probably across the globe really at the moment, in this adjustment and finding that balance. But I think ultimately it's just about not being too hard on yourself as well, and just actually doing what you can do, I think, and just sort of managing those expectations of people in your team, and like I say, understanding and respecting people's time. If you are juggling things like kids and other commitments as well, is sort of obviously your work, and just finding that balance. I mean, just allowing yourself time to switch off and just pick up from the sort of, and you can have days and you're on sort of back-to-back Zooms, and I think it's literally just a case of going, have a 5-minute break in between, reset, come back to it, you know, go for a walk if you need to, and I think it just adds to the previous point about productivity as well. If you can keep having these smaller breaks and allowing, just being easier on yourself and not being too hard on yourself, and you are doing the best that you can in these really uncertain times, I think you'll find that you'll just be slightly more, you know, well-rounded in terms of the whole thing. But I think it's always an ongoing
learning each day, that's for sure. Lauren, we might have time for one more question, possibly.
It would be good to go to the top tips now, if possible.
Oh, fine, okay, I thought we had some time. So finally, if we can do the top 3 tips from each of you about how businesses should be looking to attract and retain talent in these changing times. Robert, if we could begin with you.
Okay, so I guess there's a couple of dimensions. One is on the retention side of that. So I think for me, possibly never more than before, is that kind of really visible, authentic leadership. I think one of the things organisations have seen, and I take Geraint's point that, you know, we're talking about organisations that have been able to move and function in a home working environment. Obviously, if you're in hospitality or other sectors, that they haven't had that luxury. But I think one of the things that COVID has given is that we've seen our leaders in their living rooms, looked at the pictures behind them, had a look at what they've got on their bookcases. I think it's made people more accessible and kind of more personal, and I think a real desire to make sure that they continue with that, and that leadership is really authentic and kind of clear around direction of travel is one element. I think the second for me will be more practical things, will be looking at that recruitment process and how can you digitize it. And make sure that it is safe for people. So whether that's video interviewing, virtual assessment centres, look at how you remodel that element. And the third part for me is, I think organisations are going to see a deluge of applications. So how can they build in more filters at the start of the process? You know, maybe be a little bit more candid about about some of the challenges the organisation faces to help people self-select out the process much more quickly.
Great, thank you, Robert. Emily, if we can go with you next.
Yeah, absolutely. In true team spirit, we have 3 between us from the co-op, so as not to be too overwhelming. The thing, just building on something Robert said there, you know, you're inevitably going to be declining a lot of candidates in this current climate. And at the very least, I think you should make sure you get some comms informing them of their outcome in the application process, trying to give useful, meaningful feedback to as many people as you can. And the way, you know, you treat candidates is in the spotlight at the moment, and it directly impacts your ability to attract the best candidates, whether that be now or in the future. And then Gina's got our other 2.
Well, in terms of the top tips, essentially the first one we're gonna mention, well, the second one, attracting candidates on that side of things has been fairly easy than it was, well, a bit more easy than it was sort of pre-pandemic. I think it's really important that organisations are really clear in their recruitment and employer brand comms about their employee and colleague proposition. So essentially, what is it like to work in our business? By being clear and honest, you're basically setting out that compelling but realistic proposition. So you'll attract the right candidates and retain them for longer when they realise that the job is actually what they signed up for. And then finally, obviously you're going to be receiving quite a lot of applications as well. As we mentioned before, obviously the job situation can be a bit uncertain at the moment, and it can be really tempting from a recruitment point of view to make your hiring criteria quite extensive and exclusive, because you've got so many more numbers to manage and get through, people that can ultimately hit the ground running. But by doing that, you're potentially making those talent pools less diverse, less inclusive. And obviously, as I mentioned before, it's never been more important for organisations to really focus on that diversity and inclusion. So the tip would basically be just make sure that your comms, your processes, your policies, everything's geared towards attracting and retaining people from that broad range of backgrounds.
Great, thank you, Gina and Emily. And Geraint?
Yeah, first of all, be flexible and allow flexibility wherever you can. Secondly, that implies that this is a really good time to reassess the nature of the jobs in your organisation. And if a vacancy comes up, don't necessarily go to fill that vacancy with the job in the same format as it was in before. It's a good time to unbundle jobs and look at the individual tasks that make up a job to decide which of those tasks can be undertaken flexibly, which can't, and therefore rebundle them into different jobs so that you can maximize the potential to work flexibly within the organization. So don't take jobs as a given, right? So scatter the tasks around the posts in a different way, if that is to the benefit of the organization at this time. And the third thing is know the market, know the geography of the market, and be ambitious. So if you are working in the global market, seek talent globally.
Great, thank you. Right, so it's time to now wrap up. Once again, a big thank you to Geraint and a big thank you to the panelists for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure, so thank you very much. We'll follow up with an email with answers to any questions we didn't get to during the webinar, and keep an eye out for the email that we will send with a recording, which will have the slides on there also. We really do request that you fill out our surveys just to make sure that we provide you with the topics that you're interested in, and please take your time, because your voice and opinion is so important to how we progress and move forward. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day. Thank you.